a warm welcome to Personal Finance. I'm Gugulethu Cele. Now today we come to you from the Investec headquarters here in the heartbeat of Sandton in Johannesburg. And the reason that brings us here is for the launch of the Investec GIBS Savings Index, a new quarterly update that will provide us with further insight into the true reflection of the savings culture in South Africa. Just exactly how do we fare, how do we compete against our international counterparts, and what savings means for individuals like you and I here on the streets of South Africa. Well, to find out more, I caught up with Renee Grobler, who's the head of Investec Cash Investments, to find out why this index is quite important.
So the index is really a first for South Africa, which I'm quite excited about. There are mainly four reasons for the index, and the first one was to provide some credible academic research on the topic of saving and how it impacts South Africa, also from a macroeconomic perspective. I think, as a country, we understand that we as individuals have to save, but we haven't always understood the real importance of savings fueling investment, fueling economic growth. So there was a bit of research, and that's why we partnered with GIBS to help us with that academic research and to bring some credibility, to the findings that we're going to discuss today. So that's the first reason. The second reason is when you think about saving, what often happens is that we say South Africa is in a poor state of saving. But when we have that discussion, the first question that goes through my mind is relative to what? So what should our savings really be? And the idea with the index was to create an aspirational benchmark as a country to really see what is the level of adequate saving to fuel economic growth in the country, and what are our international peers doing in this regard. So how do we stack up internationally? And that's really the second reason for the index. And the third reason is really so that we can on a regular basis measure the performance of the South African savings components to see whether it is actually helping economic growth or not. So, now we've got a benchmark, and then on a quarterly basis, we would like to track our progress towards this benchmark. And then lastly, we all know how important savings is, and we as Investec and GIBS would really like to start the conversation, get some depth to the savings conversation, and invite everybody in society, whether it be policymakers, financial institutions, the man on the street, to get involved in this conversation and really to help us turn our savings trap around in South Africa.
Exactly. I'm happy that you mentioned the fact that we are going to monitor this trend going forward, but perhaps if we do take a look back over the last, 10, even 20 years, yes. I understand that the savings rate in South Africa has declined quite significantly. Yes. What are the drivers behind this?
So I think when you look at the savings rate, which is predominantly what we've been tracking, you can break it down into three components. It's often measured as a percentage of GDP. So you will say governments, firms, which are corporate SA companies, and then individuals make up the components of the savings rate in South Africa. If you look at that over the 26 years that we have actually constructed the index, you'll see a steady decline in the savings rate. Before the 1980s, we actually had savings rates above 20. Now we're sitting at 16.3 is the current savings rate in South Africa, which is a percentage of GDP. And the interesting fact is that savings and investment being equal, economic research shows that you need a rate between 25 and 30% to actually fuel investment in the country to have growth elevated above 5%. Sure. So, our savings rate, if that's what you're asking, is really quite low. And when we look at all the components of the savings index, which is not just based on the savings rate, but also the environmental factors, what we see is a steady structural decline in the South African savings environment and in the result of savings in South Africa. I mean, as an interesting fact, I won't give away the score of the savings index right now, but in 2015, we actually sit at the lowest score since inception 25 years ago. And that really just shows us where we are as a country in terms of savings.
That's quite scary, and I'm sure for the individuals who must be watching at home, they might think that the excess funds that they might have in their bank accounts is sufficient enough. But what is actually inhibiting South Africans from saving efficiently? Is it because we tend to consume a lot, or because that's not where our thinking is at the moment when it comes to savings and investments?
It's something that I'm quite passionate about. We tend to, as product providers or financial institutions, preach to individuals to save more. But when we do the research, we find that there are actually some social, behavioral, cultural and situational factors that inhibit savings. And those are the 10 environmental factors that we identified in the index. I'll give you an example. Some of them are self-evident and circular. So things like unemployment, low growth in per capita income, low productivity. These are all fundamental economic issues that the country's been battling with over the last few years. But if you're unemployed, you don't have money, you can't save. If you look at the country at the moment, 2/3 of our GDP is made up of consumption expenditure of households. You might say that's very high, but if you look at what that's actually been spent on, it's basic necessities. So, if you look at the demographic in South Africa, we have a lot of low-income households, many of them being supported by social grants. There's 16 million people on social grants in the country, most of them families who have social grants supporting their children. And if you look at the environment, it's hard for these people to save because they don't have the income. Some of the other factors are things like uncertainty, urbanization rates, our dependency, old age and young age dependency, and also how we incentivize in terms of monetary policy, the interest rates. Higher interest rates typically incentivize people to save, but when you have high indebted households, it can also reduce your disposable income.
Exactly.
So, it's not an easy answer, and I think that's why the index is so appealing, because it aims to unpack the core issues around what makes it hard for us to save. The index is not aimed to provide financial advice to individuals around where they should save, in which vehicles they should save. That's really where your financial advisor comes in. And for the individual on the streets, I would really recommend a good financial advisor, because it's getting so tough to try and figure out in which vehicle, which asset class, to try and invest, especially where you have market volatility and currency, doing a roller coaster ride.
Precisely. We've seen that, and we've monitored the market volatility, so we understand just exactly how fragile the economic times are. But I'm glad that you touched on the fact that perhaps the index will give us indicators and stimulate a discussion for us to source solutions here. When we take a look at our international counterparts, which is also included in the index, what is it that countries like Singapore are doing correct that we can perhaps learn from?
So in terms of our international counterparts, we actually looked at 13 countries who, through economic research, not our own, have been identified as economic miracles. One of the interesting facts about these economic miracles is that they all show a high investment rate and a high savings rate. And they qualify as economic miracles because for a 25-year uninterrupted period, they have all shown growth of 7% or more GDP. So really, these are the ones we should be looking to say, what have they done right? Again, there are a number of factors that play into creating that growth. It's not just one thing. As an example, you mentioned Singapore. Some countries have got compulsory savings, a very topical issue in South Africa at the moment. And in some countries, that has actually helped. In other countries, it has not really helped. So it depends also on the cultural and your environmental factors to say, how will that socially be accepted and how will that drive consumer and household behavior in terms of savings? But to give you some of the things that we really need to focus on. So in the index, we do identify a few areas that if we address them, we could really make a difference in savings in South Africa. And the tendency is to think that it's policy decisions. It's not always policy decisions. A lot of these solutions are microeconomic solutions, ground-up solutions that can be driven by financial institutions, markets, individuals, groups. And I'll give you some examples. Financial literacy is shown to be one of the biggest issues. And although in the index, the score for financial literacy is around about, I think it's 70 out of 100, 100 being the pass mark for where we need to be, I think there's a lot that we can do in terms of progressing that. And it's not just basic education. There's a lot of innovations internationally around financial literacy, starting with children. One of the most interesting things I found in the research, Cambridge actually did a study to say, as children, your money habits are formed by the age of 7. Can you imagine that?
The age of 7?
Yes. So I have a 3-year-old, a 7-year-old, and an 8-year-old. And how do you teach your children about money?
Because I've been under the impression that kids just think that money is constantly available. They see us swiping our cards, they see us going to the ATM, so the tap never runs empty.
Exactly. Now, the wonderful thing that we have is technology these days. And there are a number of apps that have actually been created for this purpose, to teach children to save, ranging from counting coins, which just shows your toddler how to count coins, teaches them numeracy, but also a little bit about money. There are other things like ChoreBot, where you as a parent can create a chore schedule for your children, and what you then do is you give them pocket money based on the chores that they've completed, so they learn how to manage their money. And then for the teenagers, there's one that I personally really love, which is Celebrity Calamity, where what happens is that you're trying to manage as a financial advisor at the age of 12 these celebrities who've got tons of money but don't know what to do with it, and you need to try and stop them from buying 60 Ferraris and a house in Milan or whatever it might be, and put some money away for retirement. So there are many things that we can do. I mean, these are anecdotal examples, but there are much bigger programs that we could put in place to help financial literacy. And then incentives to save. We've spoken about tax-free before. Tax-free savings has entered South Africa. There's a hot topic as to whether that is actually going to stimulate new savings, or whether that's just going to move savings from one pocket to another. And remember, when you do that, yes, you might be increasing the savings of the households, but you're reducing the government's savings. So on a national level, are you really making a difference to total savings? So, when we look at what we can do as a country, there are a few areas, and amongst them, I would say financial literacy and helping people to understand the environment is something that can squarely be in, our hands.
Precisely. I'm glad that you touched on the fact that it's not just about economic policy, but also what the private sector provides from a financial services perspective when it comes to helping to encourage savings. But it also seems as though the mindset of South Africans needs to change. With regard to the man on the street who will probably read up about this index, who will watch this interview, fundamentally, are there small steps that they can take in order to encourage and increase their savings?
Yes, I think, it's a quote from Warren Buffett that I really enjoy, which says, don't save after spending, but spend after saving. And I think a financial budget, which is really just a fundamental household budget, where you put away a percentage of money before it even hits your regular bank account, that's a practical step that you can take to make sure that at least there's a level of some kind of saving. And I think a lot of people also actually avoid thinking about their finances, because the assumption is, I don't have enough. It's like the doctor, it's almost, some people avoid the doctor when they know there's something wrong because they don't want to hear the bad news. True. But that just exacerbates the problem. It's the same with saving. To face the issue at hand is much better, and compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world. So the sooner you start putting some money away, the better. So I think these are some of the things that we can look at. The research also shows that uncertainty plays a role. So when business confidence is low and household confidence, and there's uncertainty in the system, people tend to hoard a bit of cash as precautionary saving because they're nervous about what might happen for future. Sure. Make sure that you maximize that money that you're saving. Don't stick it under the mattress. Talk to a financial advisor. You could be earning 10% rather than 0. So it's just really trying to be smart about your money. And I think, if there are 2 pieces of advice that I could give, it would probably be face the issue at hand and seek financial help through an expert. We don't go to an accountant when we have a medical problem. But we tend to ask our friends when we've got financial issues, where are you investing?
Exactly.
I think the better route to go is to identify a really good financial advisor and to get them to help you to put your money in the right vehicles.
I'm so happy you said that, because a bar is always great for a good gathering, but not the ideal place for financial advice.
No, and it's also not great for friendship when that share really doesn't do that well.
Precisely. Well, Renee, we've certainly said quite a lot, but just to move forward, will we get continued updates with regard to this particular index, and how will we continue tracking the performance thereof?
Yes, so this partnership between Investec and GIBS is really a long-living one, and we intend to publish the score for the savings index quarterly. And just to give people context, the score really represents a number out of 100, and 100 being the level that South Africa needs to reach to sustain long-term economic growth of over 5%. So, if we have a score of 80, it doesn't mean we're doing quite well. It's not a percentage. It actually just means that we we need to do more to get to a level where we can sustain economic growth. So yes, we will publish the number quarterly. We'll be giving you updates, and we'll also be providing commentary around what has moved the number. If there's a significant economic or social or cultural factor that has impacted on the savings environment or the savings result in South Africa, we will provide commentary on that so that we can track what is actually making a difference, positively or negatively, in our environment.
Well, that was my conversation with Renee Grobler, the head of Investec Cash Investments, updating us on the Investec GIBS Savings Index, which was just launched today. Now, if you want to interact with us to get further insights into just exactly what does this mean for South Africa and individuals like you and I, be sure to get in touch on Twitter at CNBC Africa using the hashtag Finance410 or myself at Gugulethu. Until next time, have a wonderful evening.